Am I behind for retirement? It's probably one of the most common financial questions that people ask themselves. Before long, you're wondering whether you've made mistakes somewhere along the way and whether you've left yourself enough time to put things right. In fact, I would argue that the biggest retirement risk isn't being behind, it's not knowing whether you're behind. Imagine we have two people. Let's draw a quick figure there. Both 50 years old. The first person spends an hour reviewing their finances and then discovers they aren't currently on track for the retirement that they want. It's not the answer they hope for, but at least they now understand that situation. They still have time to increase contributions, adjust spending expectations, maybe delay retirement by a few years, or make other changes. The second person never checks. They bury their head in the sand and they assume everything will just work out fine and dandy and continue for another 10 or 15 years without even understanding numbers. Now, most people focus on the disappointments experienced by the first person, but I think the second person is actually taking the biggest risk. The first person has the information. The second person just has uncertainty. And that's why knowledge is more important than the actual answer, even if the answer isn't what you want to hear. Now, when people ask whether they're behind for retirement, they are often looking for a benchmark. They want someone to tell them how much they should have accumulated by age 40, by 50 or 60. Now, the difficulty is that retirement really doesn't work that way. Retirement isn't just a magic number. It's about income and your specific circumstances. More specifically, it's about whether your future income will be sufficient to support the lifestyle that you want to live. Now, two people can have exactly the same pension balance and be in completely different positions, while two people with a different pension balances can be much closer than they realize. Now, imagine a person, let's just change this to as 55 years old and have a pension of 250k. They also own their house outright and have plans to retire at 67. Now let's compare that with someone who is also 55 and has a pension worth £400,000. This person rents the home and wants to retire at 60. Which do you think of these two people is in a better position? At first glance, the second person appears to be in a much stronger position because they've accumulated significantly more money. However, once you take into account housing costs and maybe spending requirements, the answer becomes far less obvious. The reality is that the pension balances on their own tell us very little. What matters is whether the resources are sufficient for the retirement that they want. This is why I think a much better question than am I behind is what is my gap? The gap is simply the difference between the retirement income you would like to have and the retirement income you are currently on track to achieve. Now, once you know the size of that gap, you can begin thinking about solutions. But until you know the size of that gap, you're just simply guessing. Okay, let's move on. So let's take a straightforward example. Now imagine someone wants an income of £30,000 a year. After reviewing their pensions, investments and expected state pension entitlements, they estimate that they are currently on track for around £27,000 a year. That means they have a gap of £3,000. Suddenly that problem becomes much more tangible. A gap of 3,000 may be solved by increasing pension contributions, or perhaps working for an additional year or two, or reducing spending expectations, or making some combination of those two changes. Now imagine somebody else who wants £45,000 a year, but is only on track for 25,000. That challenge is much larger, but at least they understand what they're trying to solve. In both cases, calculating the gap between the two figures provides clarity, and clarity is a strong starting point for good decisions. Now, the reason so many people feel anxious about retirement is that they never actually get to this stage. They spend years comparing themselves with colleagues, neighbours, friends, their dog, and strangers on the internet without even understanding their own position. As a result, they don't even know that they have a small problem, a large problem, or no problem at all. They're simply carrying around a vague sense of financial uncertainty. Hope is not a retirement strategy, and retirement planning really begins when guessing ends and the numbers become clear. The good news is that finding out where you stand is usually much easier than people imagine. In fact, I would suggest just setting aside just 1 hour this weekend and answering 4 questions. Alright, so what are these questions then? The first question is, how much do you currently have? Add together your pensions, your ISAs, investment accounts, and any other assets that you currently own. That number doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be realistic. The second question is, how much are you contributing? Include your own pension contributions, your employer contributions, and any regular investing outside of your pensions, like GIAs and ISAs and all that sort of stuff. Now, many people know how much they've accumulated, but only have a vague idea of how much they're adding each year, even though future contributions often play a major role in determining retirement outcomes. And the third question is, what income do you actually want in retirement? This is where many people struggle because they never clearly define the target. The answer will pretty much vary from one person to another. A mortgage-free homeowner may require considerably less income than someone who rents. Someone planning extensive travel may require more than someone who just intends to live a quiet lifestyle at home. There isn't a right answer, but there does need to be an answer. The fourth question is, what income are you currently on track for? Based on your existing savings, your future contributions, expected retirement age, and state pension entitlement, what does your future income picture look like? Again, the estimate doesn't need to be perfect. A sensible guess is far more useful than no estimate at all. Now, once you've answered those 4 questions, ask yourself one final question. And the final question is there a gap? And if there is a gap, how big is the gap? That question is far more useful than asking whether you're behind. A retirement plan without numbers is really just a wish, whereas a retirement plan with numbers gives you something at least concrete to work with. Now, once you understand the size of the gap, you can begin deciding how to close it. You may need to contribute more, maybe retire later, spend less, save more outside pensions, or maybe go and live in another country, or go and live in a different area, maybe sell your property, or adjust your expectations. The solution will be different for everyone, but the process is remarkably similar. First, understand the problem, and then build a plan, and only then decide what actions to take.